Hi everybody, this is Tim Kane of Obsidian Entertainment, back with another Reddit question and answer session. Today we're going to be talking about combat. Our first question comes from Kaboom, who also had a question in last week's Q&A. Kaboom asks, "Hi Tim, I'm curious how the close combat in Project Eternity will turn out. Will the melee Project Eternity encompass stuff like reach weapons, opportunity attacks, flanking, grappling, charging, prone, standing modes, and so forth?" Well, let's take that one at a time. For opportunity attacks, flanking attacks, and charging, we're definitely going to have those in there. For the reach weapons, we might have those in there, we might not. What we're really going to have to look into is, are they useful enough in combat, and do we have a good way in UI of showing you that this particular reach weapon is usable because you have that extra 1 meter of reach or not. If we can do the UI stuff and we think it's useful, we'll put them in. Otherwise, we'll probably cut them. For the prone standing modes, we're definitely going to have prone. We're not going to let you use your abilities from prone. And the reason for that is entirely for animation. We're not going to do two separate animations for anything you could possibly do. You know, one like a melee attack from while standing and a melee attack while prone. We're not going to do casting while standing and casting while prone. So basically, when you're prone, you're easier to hit, which is why you want that mode in there, but you're going to have to stand up before you can do anything. For grappling, we're definitely not going to do that, and that's pretty much entirely because of animation limitations and special cases that arise in combat. For animation, it's just all the different ways people can grapple, and we'd have to do a whole mess of animations and make sure they connect correctly and look good, which is hard to do sometimes in an isometric game. But also, there's a lot of special cases, like how would a human grapple a centaur? How would a human grapple an ooze? Rather than deal with all those special cases, for the tiny subset of times where grappling would make sense, we're not going to include it. The next question comes from DTKT, who asks, "Are you guys designing some of the abilities and spells to be used in synergy with other spells, aka a grease spell and a fireball?" Yes. Short answer is we think side effects are really cool, and we're designing spells that have them and synergies that exist between spells. For example, you may have an attack that stuns an opponent and another attack that does extra damage to stunned opponents. We have all kinds of status effects that we put on people. People might be on fire, stunned, have caustic damage on them. We're definitely going to make spells that place these side effects on them and then do extra damage or extra effects. If there's a side effect, like maybe if you cast a spell on someone and they catch on fire, you have another spell that says if this is used on fire, opponents who are on fire, they actually explode and then do splash damage to everyone around them. That's really cool. If you learn these combinations, your characters are going to be way more effective than if you ignore them. The next question, question 3, comes from Carol Evzen, who asks, "On Kickstarter, you mentioned positioning will be an important aspect of combat. How important will this and tactics in general be? Will we see similar combat mechanics as in Neverwinter Nights, backstabbing or friendly fire, or something completely different?" At this stage, we can tell you that positioning is really important, and we're planning on the character having attacks like backstab and flank, which depend on not only where you're standing, but also how the opponent is positioned relative to you. More importantly, how you're positioned relative to all of your friendly targets is important, because we are going to have friendly fire in this game. The way it works is, in most modes, it's an option. You can turn it off. If you don't like it, just turn it off. In expert mode, though, it's not going to be an option. If you tell us you're an expert, you're going to have to deal with friendly fire. And then that means for abilities that either do area of effect or do some kind of splash damage where you hit the main target and the targets near it will also take similar damage, you're just going to either have to be careful on how you use those so that there's nobody around your target, or you can use it when one of your player characters who has an easy way of evading such damage, either they take very little damage from fire, or you have a rogue who's good at evading. Then you can cast, say, a fireball or a acid spray that does acid, caustic splash damage in the general direction of that rogue who's collecting all these creatures and damage a lot of things at once. Hopefully your rogue won't take damage. And as I said, that option is not going to be available in expert mode. So friendly fire will be something you can turn on and off and everything but expert mode. The fourth question comes from Doubtful Guest. I like that name. Doubtful Guest asks, A question about combat magic. I really enjoyed the complexity of the system in Baldur's Gate series, where a wizard's repertoire included contingency spells, spell triggers, spell shields of different magnitudes, prep spells like Malison, and so forth. It adds an interesting amount of strategy to a wizard duel. Will the system in Project Eternity have similar elements? Yes, it will. We already know we're going to have counters and buffs and shields, and we really like the idea of not just wizards, but classes being able to counter what other classes are doing if they're paying attention. One thing we don't like, though, we're going to make sure we never make encounters where a particular spell is required, or that a particular damage type is required. Like, we're not going to put in creatures that are only affected by silver weapons. We may say that they're affected more by silver weapons, or that other weapons do less damage, but you always have multiple ways of getting through a fight. We really like the multiple solution, not just for quest paths, but also for combat. Our fifth question comes from Wormix, who asks, in certain CRPGs, you will regenerate all your health and mana after every fight, ensuring that you have your full power for every fight. In the Infinity Engine games, you didn't regenerate spells or health after each battle, making spell management a strategic concern. While this allows individual fights to be balanced for difficulty easier and is less punishing in general, it removes an aspect of strategy from the game that a lot of players enjoy. What is Project Eternity's aim in terms of strategic resource management? Josh and I have talked a lot about the resources we want the player to juggle. And one thing we realized is in Infinity games, wizards and priests have kind of an unfair tactical disadvantage compared to fighters and thieves, in that they have resources that drain in a fight and they won't get them back until they rest. Nothing like that exists really for fighters and thieves. So what we want to do is find some middle ground where all the classes have things that they use in a fight and other things that they can use as often as they want, that they will never need to rest for. An example we came up with for wizards, we're not sure we're going to do this, but here's what we're thinking, is that when a wizard casts a low-level spell, there's no limit on how many times he can cast that. He can just keep casting that over and over. It's the higher-level spells that have a certain limit of how many times they can cast before the wizard will have to rest. And we're going to play around with things like that to try to come up with a really interesting strategy that you have to do before you enter into combat, and then tactics. Is combat going well enough that you don't really need to use that resource that will drain, or do you think it's time to pull out the big guns and really, let the enemy have it? And speaking to that, I decided to pick a bonus question based on questions that a lot of you have been asking about cooldowns, and particularly spell cooldowns, because I wanted to kind of clear up some things I've been reading on the forum boards. First off, there are not going to be any individual spell cooldowns. We don't want it to be the case where you cast a spell and then you can't recast it if you wanted to. You have to wait for some cooldown to go off. Where we will have cooldowns are in two different things. One, spells of particular levels may have a cooldown on that level. So once you've done a certain number of those abilities at that level, the entire spell level goes into cooldown. Now, how long that cooldown lasts, we're going to play with that. On short battles, you probably won't be able to use those spells again. But on long battles, the cooldown will probably wear off, and you'll be able to use those spells at that spell level again. But a different kind of cooldown exists on your grimoire. Your grimoire are the sets of spells that you've prepared in a book, and you're actually holding that book, and those are the spells that the wizard can cast. In addition, he has a few basic spells that he can always cast, but all of his other spells come from that grimoire. And whenever you switch grimoires, there will be a cooldown applied. The cooldown is such that you probably won't want to switch grimoires in the middle of combat. But if you do, you'll be able to cast spells, but you're going to have to go a few rounds using nothing but your basic spells until the grimoire cooldown is lifted. So those are ideas on cooldown, and these are ideas on combat in general. I hope we've given you a better idea of what we're putting together. We might do one more of these Q&As. Let us know what you would like to have us answer questions about. And we really like how the Kickstarter campaign is going, and we really like being able to interact with you guys in this fashion. It's really fun. So I'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.